Let me simply very briefly introduce the panelists in alphabetical order. First of all, David Beard of the Boston Globe has spent 20 years covering international affairs and foreign policy, having done so in stints in Latin America and South America, and including as deputy foreign editor of the Globe, of which he is presently the editor of whose city weekly he is presently the editor, if I got that preposition correctly. Fran Fifis is the bureau producer of CNN in Boston. She's worked for CNN in London, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. As a reporter for CNN, she's covered everything from the Kosovo conflict to the presidential election of 2000 to the September 11th attack and its aftermath. Rod Fritz of WRKO is the news director at RKO, where he has been since 1998. He has been as well news director or news anchor in Boston at several stations since 1978. Mike Macklin of WHDH reports for 7 News and has covered virtually every story that has come down the proverbial pike. He has served as a reporter and anchor for 10 years. Emily Rooney is the host and executive editor of Greater Boston on GBH. She is the winner of numerous awards for her work in various capacities. She served as director of political coverage and special events at Fox Network in New York from 1994 to 1997. Before that, she was executive producer of ABC World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Jeb Sharp of The World covers U.S. foreign policy and other international stories for The World. She's reported from Kosovo, from the Middle East, and from The Hague. She has been as well a reporter for BUR in Boston and a reporter and a news director in Alaska. And finally, of the panelists, Wayne Woodleaf, widely regarded as the dean of Boston's political writers, is the chief political columnist for the Boston Herald, a position he's held for the last 9 years. He has served as the Washington bureau correspondent for the Herald from 1976 to 1978, and then again from 1985 to 1987. I'm delighted that Jim Walsh of the Belfer Center has agreed to serve as the moderator. He is a political scientist and a research fellow at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard University's Kennedy School. He has written widely on issues of weapons of mass destruction, terrorism in the Middle East, topics which have marginal significance to tonight's program. With that, thank you very much, all of you.
Thanks very much for that warm introduction, and thank all of you for coming tonight. You must be a hardcore audience. I mean, we only get one day of spring, and we got it today, and you all agreed to come out despite that. So I'm very thankful that you're here, and I'm thankful in particular to World Boston, to the work of Brandy and Elizabeth. They on this event, and this event is really the product of their hard work. And I also want to thank the volunteers from Harvard and from World Boston for their efforts. And finally, I want to thank these journalists who all showed up, this team, this basketball team, near baseball team of journalists who are with us tonight. You know, they're here on their own accord. They come here and they're not getting paid to be here. Did I mention that before, that you're not getting paid to be here? See, and now that they're here, they can't leave, and they're here on their own time. So I think, you know, there are probably a lot of other things after working all day that they'd rather do, but they're here, and I really appreciate it. And I think it shows their commitment to the public and to these important issues. My role here tonight is simply as facilitator, and despite all the evidence to the contrary, I'm not going to say very much this evening. I'm just going to call on them. And there are some people on the panel who have doubted out loud whether I'm capable of that, but you have my solemn commitment to try. But we're not quite there yet, because I need to tell you what the ground rules are. Here they are. The first ground rule is we're going to treat everyone with respect, even the television people. Everyone gets treated well. And we get one question per person. One question, no multiple questions, one per person. If we finish everyone, you can get back in line and ask your second question. You get 1 minute, 1 minute. This is as if it's on TV. 1 minute to make your comment or to ask your question. And because, we got a lot of folks here and a limited time, so my goal is to give as many people as possible a chance to say something. So I'm going to be hard-handed about that, and I will cut you off. And people who know me know that I will cut you off. And then finally, I just think one of the ground rules is we should have some fun. And in a minute, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call on each of these panelists to just take a minute and describe, just make a quick couple of observations to get us started, to comment on whatever they think is noteworthy about media coverage of the Iraq War. But before I do that, I want to get a sense of you guys, and there's real skepticism on this panel about what I'm doing next. I want to get a sense of who you are and what you're bringing to the table here. So I'm going to do what is famous in journalism, which is a quick, unscientific poll. And so I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and if you will respond to these questions by, if the answer is yes, I want you to stand up. Not raise your hand, I want you to stand up. Okay. And there are only like 4 questions. So back in January, how many of you thought the war against Iraq was a good idea? How many of you thought the war was a good idea back in January? Okay, stand. Good. Good, okay. Now, how many of you today think the war is a good idea? So some change, yeah, and that's what the poll numbers seem to say, that people have changed their mind over time. Okay, you can sit down. Some people just want to stand, obviously, but you can sit down after the question. How many of you think that media coverage, on average, is doing a good job? Present company excluded. How many of you think the media coverage is pretty good? Okay, good. We've got some good balance here. Some people who hate them, some people who love them. And then how many of you are sick and tired of standing up? All of you will. Okay. Well, that's my non-scientific poll. And now I've ended my part of the evening, other than cutting people off. And so why don't we start with David and just work our way down the line. Just some quick introductory observations.
Sure. I'd like to say that this is probably the first war ever where journalists have been so close in such numbers to the front lines. And this is the first war in which many of the journalists have been through, at least at the Globe, all the journalists have been through some sort of preparedness, either through the Pentagon or through a group of British former military people on sort of a week-long survival training. This may be the first war where everybody that we've got has everything. Gas protection uniforms, has Kevlar, masks, the whole suits for chemical warfare, the level 4, plates and Kevlar vests and things that could stop an AK-40 round. So there's been a greater deal. I mean, the toll among journalists has been very high in this conflict, but there's been a great deal more preparedness for the what you would face than in, say, the picnic that many people expected at the beginning of the Civil War. For the Globe, I'll be just brief. We've got 14 people there, include 11 reporters, 3 photographers, and only 3 of those people are embedded with the military, so there's not that sort of overarching reliance on the military. And plus, we've got all sorts of people in Washington, UN, Boston, extra editors. Even one of our alums, Anthony Shadid, who's now at the Washington Post, who's done some very brave reporting from Baghdad over the past few weeks that you've probably seen in our separate War in Iraq section, which has been published at great expense. But that's just a quick thumbnail, and I'll go to our next panelist.
I guess my main observation is probably one you all have, which is we're sort of seeing this, uncut, unedited, more so than ever before, unfiltered. I don't remember the last time I saw a taped story on the air, certainly during the day when things are happening. Everything's live, everything's raw, and you're seeing it at the same time as all the editors are seeing it. So that's been kind of interesting, and it's been different, and I'm not sure what it means for the future of television producers, but I'll be interested to find out.
I think, likewise, I found it to be a fascinating 3 weeks, one that's been certainly challenging for the media. I think we've seen some great firsts and developments in terms of coverage. We've seen some unexpected developments. There have certainly been some disappointments for us in the media. There's been some personal tragedy for us as well, sad to say. I think we've learned a lot about war. I think we've learned a lot about ourselves and news coverage. I think I come away from it with a realization, as we so often do from events in life, that it's not a perfect world. It's not a perfect business. While there's a lot to be happy about, there are still things we should be working on to be better at. I think perhaps we'll be discovering we're better at some things than we thought we were, and we're not quite as great at some things that we thought we were. And I think we're still in a discovering process about that. And I think, interestingly enough, we're here tonight to kind of discuss in some kind of definitive way the relationship between the media and how we covered the war, and it's really not over yet. But here we are analyzing it, which is, I think, a statement of sorts about where we're at. But I think overall, we wrote another chapter in the relationship between the government and the media and our various roles. And I think we discovered along the way that while there have been some adaptations because of the way this war was waged and the access that we were allowed and the circumstances under which we were allowed it, I think we discovered that essentially we have a somewhat adversarial, or I shouldn't say a somewhat, we have an adversarial relationship with the government, the media and the government. And I think with all of the imperfections and warts, I think we should come to the conclusion, and I hope we all will come to the conclusion, that it's a relationship that has served us well, and that's why it is what it is.
I would share many of the things that have already been said. I think the war itself is overwhelming, and the coverage is overwhelming. And even if you're working in the media trying to cover what's going on, perhaps it's even more overwhelming because you're looking at so many different sources over such a short period of time. You're being bombarded with all these real-time images and this incredible technology and these 600 embedded reporters plus unilateral, that's the word that's been used, unilateral reporters who are in the field without being embedded, and then other people back home who are writing context and analysis and op-eds. It's just the sheer volume of ink and tape is overwhelming, as I said, and I think that editors have a huge challenge in trying to, I mean, they don't in the sense that so much is being presented, but there's an editorial challenge and also a consumer's challenge of where do I go to get what I really want to get? I mean, because we're all having to interpret this massive information for ourselves, and I think it's tough and it's hard to make sense of. On the other hand, I've been just so heartened by the variety of coverage. I mean, you don't really have an excuse for not finding a different perspective on something on the internet or television or radio or newspapers or magazines because there's just such a wide range. And I'm not a TV person and I don't get to watch a whole lot of television, but yesterday was a day for television. The images were so powerful, and it was quite frustrating to be working on a radio story with my head down and headphones on because it was really remarkable what was happening and what you actually could see on film. So I have a whole wide range of mixed emotions about all of it, and I'll be really interested to hear what panelists have to say and what your questions are as we think it through.
Just a quick addition to that, I actually was driving in the car at the time the statue of Saddam was being pulled down, and in a way, I listened to it on radio, and in a way that was more exciting and thrilling to me than some of the film I saw later, and probably it was tape. But there was something about the way the excitement of the reporters as they were describing it, and the very sudden removal of the American flag that someone had draped up on the Saddam statue, and it was almost as if someone had shouted in the ear of a commander, "Get that down right now. We can't appear as if we're an occupying force." And it was such an instantaneous and, without being able to see it, such a well-described event for me that I thought, hey, this radio's doing all right. And then Byron Pitts, who used to work as a reporter, worked for Emily, by golly. He's a good one, and he was literally dodging bullets in Baghdad. He thought he was in a secure section, and all of a sudden it wasn't so secure, which should give us a little bit of caution about the whole situation. Maybe it's all over, but it's a little bit of shooting yet to be done, I fear. A quick point about magazine coverage, which I've been very, very gratified to see. The most satisfying coverage I've seen has been in some of the magazines, and particularly the New Yorker. Then the issue of April 7th alone, they had 3 really good stories, and I'll just quickly summarize them. One was a story about what's called the Anafal widows. This is a group of mothers and widows of people who were in the Kurdish section in the north of Iraq. Hundreds of men taken off into the deserts and disappeared or slaughtered by Saddam's people in 1988. So these women they were very grateful, according to the New Yorker article, for the for the American, essentially, bombing. And one had a tremendous quote. She said, "Let the Americans bomb, God thank them. I would kill Saddam with my teeth, if I had teeth." So, and then there was a wonderful story on the financial page. I mean, talk about covering all angles, in which the reporter for the financial page talks about the need to relieve the debt that Saddam owes, the huge hundreds of millions of dollars, billions, to other countries. And he says this would be a good thing in many ways for that debt to be forgiven once the new government is established. One, the new government is going to need a lot of money to feed and clothe and give shelter, water, food, what have you, to the people. And then he also concludes the article by saying that they would send a tremendous message and set a worthy precedent. Lend to tyrants and you will get stiffed. And then he says the U.S. at least is unlikely to object. 2 of Iraq's biggest creditors are Russia and France.
Is that it? Thank goodness for my well-researched colleagues here, because I'm going to speak more from the heart. I noticed that 50% of you did not stand up when asked the question, did the media do a good job? And I'm going to get back to you because I took notes. I have been awed and overwhelmed by what I have seen and what I have read. And I'll challenge any one of you to have seen and read more than me. So, between the newspapers and Jules Crittenden and Brian McCrory of the Herald, Brian McCrory
the Globe.
of the Boston.
Oh, God.
Boston Globe.
Here we go.
The unbelievable detailed reporting from the New York Times. Every single, let's go back through some of the things that Wayne just said. You can find it anywhere you want. The embedded reporters have a slice. I've been awed and overwhelmed. Bob Arnott, Rick Leventhal, unfortunately David Bloom. It's a slice, but it's just a portion of what you get to see. And I have to say, overall, I think it's just been spectacular. The one thing, if I was going to be, and I will be, critical and introspective, we've heard a lot in the last couple of days about the American perspective being a bloodless war, and this little kid in the hospital in Iraq with the arms blown off and a burned body, he's become this kind of symbolic Iraqi for us to embrace the notion that we're injuring civilians, and there's been a lot of talk that maybe we focus too much on the journalistic kills. I'm not clear why that is, and maybe there are people on this panel who know more than I do about why. Why isn't Richard Engel, who's in the Palestine Hotel, running out and taking pictures of the civilian kills? I don't know. But I do not believe it's self-censorship. and I don't believe that people sitting back in the offices of CNN and ABC News or the Boston Globe or anybody else is saying, you know what, let's not show these people that stuff because they can't take it. But I do want to know why you think the news media has not done a good job.
Well, I have nothing else to say. Thank you all for coming tonight. A couple of observations that I would like to make from the comments that have been made so far on the panel. And first, I want to disagree with David, my esteemed colleague from the Boston Globe, that these journalists are on the front lines more than any other journalists in other wars. I disagree with that. We still have a number of journalists who are missing from the Vietnam War. We have a number of journalists who were killed in the Vietnam War. So I think if you look at, in a perspective, a ratio, the number of journalists who have been killed when you compare it to the number of Marines or Army of the United States and Britain who have been killed, perhaps there is a little disproportion there, but perhaps they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I think anytime you go into a war as a journalist, you have to be careful to watch out what you're doing. No place is safe, and you can't be certain that someone on the good side is going to protect you, because they just are not. That's not what they're there for. I'm interested in the fact that no matter who you are, whether you be a liberal, whether you be a conservative, whether you be neutered, whether you be on Viagra, any slant that you want on the war in Iraq, you can get anywhere you want. As Emily said, she's read more than probably all of us have. But what I think a lot of you may have done is you'll find something that you agree with, whether it be on the internet, whether it be CNN, whether it be Fox News, whether it be radio, and you'll stick with that because that's what you want to hear. Unfortunately, you should probably switch around a little bit. You should pick up the Christian Science Monitor and read how they're covering the war. You should pick up USA Today. You should watch Fox, CNN, ABC, NBC, and MSNBC. Try to watch all of them. That's how you're going to really get the picture of what's going on, because if you don't, you're just going to get one thing. And I thank Wayne for listening to us on WRKO describing the falling of that statue.
Well, I want to thank our demure and reticent panel for those opening remarks and invite you all to respond in kind. So I think people can approach a microphone. Others may, there may be question cards. Did we do the card thing or not? Yes, we do. So the shy amongst you can fill out cards with questions and I can read them. Or you can come up and answer your own question, but now's the time to do it. And where's our timer? Timer? Ready? So Stephen, undergraduate at Harvard University, has taken the obligations of the clock. So let's, can we start there?
I have a minute.
Sure. A full minute. You don't have to use it all, though.
This is probably more to Emily than anybody else. I'm just a consumer. I don't go to a journalism school. I'm not a journalist. I'm just an average consumer of news. I'm a little nervous. In the past 3 weeks, I have not watched any network television. I've been really turned off by the network TV, and the best thing that happened to me is that Comcast gave me BBC America. I've also taken great comfort in Channel 2. The first weekend, they had Jim Lehrer on Saturday and Sunday night. But I have found the network news, and I don't know if anybody else finds this, to be kind of maudlin and sentimental. I mean, I read the Globe, and I go to the library to get the New York Times, because I'm basically getting cheaper in my old age. But if it weren't for GBH and if it weren't for BBC America, I don't think I would have paid much attention to all of this. I worked in Europe for a couple of years, and I got really spoiled with the news over there. And I come back here. That's a minute? Okay. Sorry. I'm so turned off.
If there's a punchline at the end, go ahead.
No, I'm not that
Okay,
quick.
well, at the risk of losing my job, GBH is completely irrelevant. We've done nothing on the war. And you just admitted...
Thanks,
Maybe on
Emily.
my
Thanks for
show.
commenting on
Thank
my
you,
role.
Jim.
I appreciated that.
But
Thanks, Frank.
PBS Network has done nothing. In fact, I've complained about that right to the top of the network. We've done nothing. And you just admitted that you don't watch network news. Do you know what I do? I rush out of the driveway at GPH. I'm in a panic. Get home for two reasons: to let my dog out and to watch the network news. Because if I don't see it, I don't feel like I know what's going on. I watch CNN, I watch MSNBC, I do all those things. And I've said this for 100 years, and I'm going to say it to you tonight. When I get home at 6:33, I know I've missed the lead story. When I tune in CNN at 6:33, I don't know where I am.
Other comments, other responses. And in the future, as people ask questions, will you just say your name? Because I don't know how to say the questioner. Any other responses to the questioner?
Only to say that Comcast offers other varieties too. I mean, my wife last night watched Scola, watched French broadcasting, and then watched Argentine broadcasting to see. She thought the French played it relatively straight, given their public policy opposition to us, and that the Argentines didn't. But there are other discrete sources, amazing, just in video. Not to mention all the internet things out there.
Anything else? Fran, do you want to defend CNN? You don't have to. No, okay, fine. Reg.
Reg McKean. I am troubled by the fact that I suspect most of the people in the room and the panelists have spent most of their time on the elite media, whatever that is, and I wonder if there isn't a difference between the elite media and what the average citizen has been spending a smaller amount of time with. But my main question is to follow along from Emily's comment and see if there are any ways in. I mean, I agree with Emily that the media, at least the elite media I read, has done a terrific job. Though I think the best comment about it that all opinion sides can agree with was Tom Brokaw's remark: if it's like trying to use a thimble on a broken fire hydrant, we've just been overwhelmed with the sheer quantity, as I guess someone on the panel pointed out. But
Rich,
what improvement would you like to have seen in the media coverage that you have watched for the last 3 weeks? I address all the panelists with that question.
Who's up first?
Well, I'll take that first. The thing I would like to have seen, if we have another short, hopefully, if we have some more wars, hopefully they will be short as this has been up to this point. 3 weeks, amazing. And I hope if we have some more, we will have a little more perspective overall on the coverage of it than we saw on this one. There was too much attention to the shock and awe at first, and oh gee, the shock and awe didn't shock, it didn't awe. And then we got into about a weekend. We had Seymour Hersh, who was an awfully good journalist, but blew this one, making a prediction or making an assessment on radio that, after writing a similar article in the New Yorker, making an assessment on radio that we were at stalemate, that Rumsfeld was all wet on his theory of this lightning fast, lighter, smaller military force, and then we would stalemate. We could be months before we could really go anywhere. The very next day, the huge march towards Baghdad begins, and then about a week later, here we are with Saddam's statue in the street. So I think the overwhelming coverage, a lot of it very good, but in terms of stepping back and having some perspective on it, I think the media in general tended to lose it.
Let's just go down the whole line. Jeb, do you want to, we'll work this way and then circle back around? Do you have, on the question of what improvements or what lessons learned, I know it's early, but based on what we've seen so far.
I would agree in part with Wayne. Part of the problem of this rush that we're in is that it's almost like election coverage when people complain that it's the horse race and not the issues. I mean, I don't think that's the case here, but the war is so intense and so adrenaline-filled, and there's so much information about it, and you are following the battles and what you discern and what you think you can figure out about who's killing who and how many people are dead and what that means, and the maps and the strategies, and sort of forgetting how did this begin, and what does the Arab world think about it, and where is Iraq anyway, and the sort of the bigger questions. And I don't know, in terms of improvement, how you do that. I mean, I think it's an editorial decision. Are we going to do Arab voices today, and are we going to do a bit of history today, interspersed with all this other stuff? But that's you kind of hunger for that in some moments. And I know on my program, at some point last week, we did an interview with an expert on the Shia in southern Iraq, and it was great, and people understood much better the reticence at the beginning to greet the British and American forces because they had been burned by the uprising in 91, or not being helped in the uprising in 91, but also a whole host of decades of history there. And I thought, we probably should have had this on a month ago, not last week. So it was that sort of running to catch up with the things that were going to hit us in the face that we needed to understand. So, hindsight is everything. I mean, they're just finding those really important questions and zeroing in on them, even in the face of trying to cover war. And I don't know what the answer is.
Mike?
I think too, by the very nature of what we do, as much as we try to put things in context and add perspective, all we're really able to offer is, in many ways, gut instinctual impressions and first impressions of something that is unfolding before our eyes. And the only real deeply valuable perspective perhaps can only be offered by historians. We talk about the results of the war or the impact of the war, and I mean, who's to know if a year from now or 2 years from now, by some manner or means, Saddam Hussein is back in Iraq and in control or fighting to get back in control again. Our impressions of the impact and the outcome and the results of the war would be far different then, in a year or a year and a half from now, than they might be tonight or tomorrow or next week or next month. And although it's often said that we're writing the first draft of history, I think we have to always remember and remind ourselves and be conscious of the fact that that's what it is. It's the first draft. And the first draft of some masterpieces, haven't always been pretty either.
Fran?
I have to agree. There's too much amateur analysis or Monday morning quarterbacking. But if you're in a control room producing shows, you know that you're limited by two things: the technology, who's available, which reporters are able to speak at that moment, which ones are able to get satellite space or get their dish up, or there's their video phone plugged in. I mean, there are limitations in you don't always have the sources to tell the story the way you want to tell it. Sometimes things are happening so fast you just have to go with it. So sometimes it's not always as well thought out as you might think. Things just happen haphazardly, and you get it on the air as fast as you can. But I guess I'd like to see. I've had a problem since the very beginning with the casualties of Iraqis, and not knowing how many hundreds or maybe even thousands now they're saying of people are killed. But I did hear one defense of that today, which was, we don't know which ones were soldiers and which ones were citizens because they weren't wearing uniforms. This is a very unconventional war. It's a bizarre experience, people behaving in a friendly way and then blowing themselves up. I mean, we've never covered anything like this, and we're sort of figuring it out as we go.
Well, I'd argue there were some of those similar issues in Vietnam and Korea on who's on our side, who isn't on our side, who's wearing white, should we shoot at them? But I think that the opportunity for us I think it was a real rush. I think a lot of the American public perhaps felt a sense of unease at this rush to war. I think that perhaps there'll be some sort of compensatory examination after the war on some basic questions like, how do we as a society come to war? Who's connected in this debate? Who doesn't have a voice? What kind of society do we have where so many people are so disconnected from the physical costs of war? Families, campuses, whole socioeconomic classes with a lesser stake in the fighters on defending our flag. How does that influence that debate? And that first question, how do we come to war? And, I think that all this experience will make us all think a little more deeply about it the next time.
Rod?
Well, I hope in the next war we have Emily running in the backseat of an F-15 on a bombing run, because I think that'd be pretty interesting to see. I think we are learning as we go along, without a doubt. I think it's very, very interesting. There was a quote earlier when this war began that this is real reality TV. When you have live pictures via satellite phone of people riding armored personnel carriers and tanks and reporters sitting down and chowing down with the Marines, and you have Oliver North, a former lieutenant colonel in the Marines, who is back with the Marines, reporting for Fox News, giving a whole different perspective, though slanted, but a whole different perspective on what's going on. I just think it's very, very interesting. I do not think that there was a rush to war. If you want to get in on that topic, I think that Saddam Hussein certainly baited the free world long enough, and it was time. And I can't think of a whole lot of people, and I may be opening up a whole can of worms in this room, but I can't think of a whole lot of people that would be happy to see Saddam Hussein back in power tomorrow.
Commander Rooney?
Just getting back to the original question, which was, what would you change? And I said, I think I feel horrified in a sense that knowing the network news business as I do, I think they were kind of rooting for this war. And this may surprise some of you because network news is considered, the liberal bastion and all that. But you know what, guys? It's a great story. And here's the one thing they missed going in, which was the run-up to the war, the reasons for it. I think they've done a spectacular job, as I have said, not just the networks. In fact, that's only sort of the shallow end of it, but did not do a good job of explaining and delving into the reasons why this was a war that we should fight, and that is where the shortcoming was.
And we start with Wayne? Okay, good. Please say who you are and then ask away.
My name is Camille Nonation. I live in Boston. And I just want to ask, there's this tremendous news that we've had, the Globe's section. Every hour there's news on the radio and so on. How can you explain that studies show that Americans are much more uninformed about world events than other countries? I think if you take a poll, you'll find that a lot of Americans wouldn't be able to put Iraq on the map and wouldn't know the difference between Iraq and Iran, and let alone know about the colonial history of Iraq. How would you explain, after all this news, that Americans are so far behind other countries?
Can I tack on to that just a little bit? And this, because I don't want to prove Emily wrong, I am going to say something here. What about the idea also related to that, and I may be wrong about this, but it seemed as if viewership dropped precipitously at some point. Certainly saw a change in the coverage. It was on the, and here I'm talking about television coverage, but it seemed at some point, 7 days in, 10 days in, there was something that happened, and it was back to the soap operas, and the local special coverage was dropped, and something happened in the viewership at some point, and maybe it's related to that, maybe not. But who wants to take a piece of any of those?
I think in terms of viewership changes, it's like everything else. When the war starts, it's big, it's new, and everyone has their eyeballs on it. And as it wears on days into weeks, like anything, you get a certain sameness to it, because there isn't always necessarily a critical turning point each day. There isn't necessarily a highlight each day, like the statue of Saddam being pulled down, or the first bombing raids, or the first shots we see of tank warfare. And it's because while television was going along for the ride, they weren't out there producing a 10-part television miniseries. They were out there fighting a war. And sometimes war goes the way it's planned and hoped for, other times it doesn't. And I think in terms of what gets put on television, as things go on, there's a certain gauging of how much interest there is in something from day to day, what's really new, how much new information is there, and how much of a service are we providing by simply throwing on what's happening at the moment simply because it's happening. And there's a lot of stuff that gets put on TV as it's happening in the early days simply because, again, it's new, it's major, people are interested in it, and for a certain period of time, there's a sense that people can't get enough of it, and we're responding to that perceived appetite for it. As we perceive that thirst, that appetite is waning, you're going to see coverage taper off. It's kind of a quid pro quo thing, I think.
I believe there was a survey out, might have been in today's paper, that showed that the viewership on the regular networks, the ABC, CBS, and the NBC, was down over the past week, and yet the viewership of the cable channels, the Fox, the CNN, the MSNBC, CNBCs, they were up, which to me shows, I would assume, which I hate to do, but I would assume that that people are interested in what's going on anytime they want to find out. In other words, they don't want to just wait for 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 5:30, whatever. They want to, when they get home, whatever time they get home, they want to find out what they missed, so they'll turn on the cable channels. But getting back to the other question regarding where people don't know where Iraq is and Iran, you know, I don't think it's the media's job to educate the public. It's the media's job to inform the public about what's going on. As far as the education of geography, you know, that's part of the public schools or the private schools, wherever you go to school. And if they're not teaching it correctly, then that's a whole other topic for another night.
Any other comments before we go to the next questioner? Any of you guys want to jump in on anything? Okay. This gentleman in green, say who you are.
My name is Jeff Johnson. I'm a professor of philosophy at Suffolk University. And my question is primarily directed at the representative from CNN and secondarily at the Boston Herald. In a free, open society, a democratic society, we should be able to assume that the press acts as a fourth estate that, as the gentleman here just said, informs the public. But how can, I guess the thing I'm disturbed by is when I see on CNN the American flag always in the corner of news reports and Lou Dobbs wearing an American flag in his lapel. One would assume that reporting is supposed to be objective and not a kind of cheerleading. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, first of all, I'm here on my own, and my opinions are my own, not CNN's. But I tend to agree with you. I don't think Lou Dobbs should wear a flag. CNN's competing with Fox in order to tap into that market, and so they say they're waving their flag as well.
Wayne?
In terms of the Boston Herald, I don't think we've done a whole lot of flag waving. I think we've tried to cover the war fairly straight. We have on the editorial page.
Right. I mean, the editorial page is one thing.
Yeah, that's quite different. But I think on the news pages and particularly on the front page, we've tried to play it fairly straight, but to give the most graphic look at what's going on that particular day. And you know, I brought with me I'm sure you can't see it from way up there, but it's for those who are interested later. This is a front page we had on Thursday, March 27th. And it shows an American GI, black GI for that matter, with a wounded Iraqi, I think a soldier, carrying him like in a fireman's hold. and it's a wonderful headline. It says, "Burden of War." And it just speaks for so many metaphors for the war. So I think it's, and you see the bloody bare feet of the Iraqi. And I think that, yeah, it shows a good side of the Americans. But we also have had some other photos of very horribly mutilated civilian casualties. So I think we've tried to tell the story as straight as possible.
Great, thank you.
Could I make another point about that? Another issue that I think people should be cognizant of is with the 24-hour news cycle that we're in now, and with these all-news cable channels, news and public affairs cable channels, where we feel we're seeing news 24 hours a day, not all of it is news. When you're watching the Larry King program, you're watching Larry King. He's free to express his opinions. He has guests on who express their opinions. Larry King is not the news. When you're watching Hannity and Combs on Fox, they're speaking about the news. They have opinions. They have guests with opinions. You're not watching the news. That's not like watching the CBS Evening News, the NBC Nightly News, ABC World News Tonight. Those programs are not the news. They're news-based. What they're talking about are news events, but it's different from watching a newscast. And in those programs, you are bound to see a lot more edge, a lot more attitude, a lot more opinion. And I think sometimes the line between what's news and what isn't has at times become blurred. I noticed it myself watching one of the cable channels the other night, and there was, as I was watching it, as most of us do quite often, we're watching that and doing something else at home as well. I was watching what I thought was a promo for military recruitment. And I thought it was a pretty slick promo for one of the armed services. And then they went to a commercial break, and then I was left with the impression, I think it was just a kind of a music bed with images of the war in music to get to the commercial break. And then I was waiting for the tagline at the end, join the Marines or see a Marine recruiter somewhere. And it wasn't, and it was just a kind of a filler. We call them bumps to the commercial break. And I think it could have probably left a questionable impression in the minds of a lot of people as to what it was. Was that an ad? Was that part of the tail end of a news story? Was that part of the programming? What was it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Edward Martins, and my question is have you ever thought of doing any kind of joint ventures with some of the other, like the foreign news agencies? For instance, I'd love to know, I can't speak Arabic, so I can't follow Al Jazeera, but I'd love for, say, one of you and, say, CNN and does half a thing with Al Jazeera or something like that. Because I have friends in the Middle East who are telling me what Al Jazeera is showing. So I get sort of a filter through my friends and that sort of thing. Al Jazeera and there's several others around the world too that I'd love to hear more about what they're saying. Chinese, Russian.
You can get that. Do you have cable?
Yes, I do, but unfortunately I speak French, Spanish, German, and Italian, but Arabic I'm kind of lost
Okay,
on.
but you can get French TV, you can get the BBC.
Oh yeah, I've seen those.
You can get Al Jazeera with a little satellite dish. It's nothing. A lot of people have it. I mean, that's how we follow it, frankly. People tell us what's happening on Al Jazeera. But your point is a better one, which is there any way to do kind of a joint operation? I think they should. I think I've been accused of being a booster for Al Jazeera. For heaven's sakes, I didn't know what it was a year ago. But I think what they do is completely different and has a different perspective of CNN and the other channels. But I think it's a good point. They should somehow meld their resources and do some translating. They are showing video and putting things on the air that we're not. And I said that earlier. I'm not sure why. Are they getting things we're not getting, or are they just putting things on that we're not putting on? I don't know.
We actually are. We do have a relationship with Al Jazeera, and we do share video. But we also have a reporter, Octavia Nasser, who monitors. She's Lebanese, and she monitors all the Arabic stations, and does a piece every day, and sits with Wolf Blitzer in Kuwait, and she's in Atlanta, sitting on the set, and tells him. Actually, she's on the Paul Azan show as well. It's a pretty regular feature on CNN, where she goes through all the channels and tells American viewers how this is being portrayed in the Arab world.
I do think that it's the International Tribune Syndicate or someone where there's a collection of newspapers. They've gone out and they've made alliances with, I think, a Lebanese paper, or certainly with papers in different parts of the world. So I've found that through the Internet, where there are newspaper coalitions that are sharing reportage or that can link you to their partner, which is based in another country.
There is also an English language website from Al Jazeera now, which is...
I'm sorry.
Yeah, could you the mic?
A couple interesting things have happened since the war began, or since just before the war began. One is that there's an Al Jazeera English language website, but it is under such heavy use that the server continues to crash, so it's very hard to get on. But also LexisNexis, for people who have access to that, is now running or holding transcripts of Al Jazeera programs in, I think, English transcripts, which I just find very interesting. I mean, here this is sometimes, seen as this big clash of civilizations, but in fact, there are ways in which I think people on both sides of the world are hungry for information about the other, and that information is really flowing more freely than it ever has.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Olivia Reeves. I've been a little disturbed that there doesn't seem like there's a lot of coverage educating or informing the public about Iraqis, the Iraqi culture, traditions. Seemed when we were bombing Afghanistan, there was a big effort to let us know what Afghanistan and Afghanis were like. And I was wondering, maybe I'm not getting the right sources. I listen to the radio all the time and some network news, but if anyone would like to comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
One of you mentioned before the analogy to horse race coverage, and I must say that I get that feeling too, that it's who's ahead and who's behind, and the generals talking about tactics and strategies, like it was a presidential campaign, and less of some of the other context stories. But that's again an unscientific poll. But I think that analogy is not totally misplaced. I think. Yeah, well, thanks, Rich.
I think there's perspective in that kind of programming out there. Could there be more? I think there could be more. I think part of it is, again, where we are with this 24-hour news cycle, and to the point where there is very little what we call appointment viewing with respect to news. Emily mentioned it before. She says she's angry if she doesn't get home in time to see the evening news. There was a time when the news was on at 6 for a half an hour, and then a half an hour of network news, and then another half hour at 11. And if you were going to watch the news, you had to be there and to watch at those times, what we called appointment viewing. Now you can flip on the television almost any hour of the day or night and get a newscast. And as a result, since the technology has allowed us to do that, and since because of the lives we live with people working different hours and all kinds of different shifts, there is a lot of programming that is being aimed that way in terms of the 30-minute news wheel, where everything gets repeated, and people say, my God, it gets repeated over and over and over again. And I'd always say, well, it's your fault for sitting there watching it. And we're not putting it on for people with the idea that people are going to sit there and watch a 30-minute news wheel be repeated half hour after half hour after half hour. It's being programmed with the idea that there is a new audience coming in all the time, and you're picking up viewers all the time and losing viewers all the time. And but there is more contextual programming that's out there. I would happen to agree with those who think there isn't enough. I would like to see us do more. You have to look for it, but it's there. But you're not going to find it as necessarily as easily as the headlines on the hour.
Jim?
Quick comment.
Oh, Wayne, sure. Either one.
I think these things run in cycles, and before the war actually began, before the bombs began dropping and the bullets flying, I think there were, and I remember seeing some on Channel 2, some contextual history, culture of Iraq, background of not just of Saddam Hussein, but of the country itself, and reading more of it in some of the leading newspapers. I think then when the war actually started, obviously the attention was more on what's going on day by day. Now that it may be slowing down, or is slowing down, I think we'll begin to see again a cycle, because there'll be that news hole to fill, a cycle of the stories that will go into more depth as you and I think us also want.
I was just going to say that, I agree with you. The more context, the better, and the more narratives we have about Iraqi culture, the more it would help, especially since it's, complicated and has this huge history. But there were just a couple of specific things that came to mind. It has been very hard to get a visa to Iraq, before the war, and you had to travel with government minders. So it's never been an easy reporting project. You couldn't just go there and do things easily. And then one of the issues about the embedded reporters is we get this great coverage of the war, but it's not like they can leave a unit and go visit a village and meet the local musicians. So you're getting very much the traveling with the troops picture and not the stuff outside it, which is sort of an interesting conundrum about that kind of coverage. But this sort of helps.
I just wanted to add, I heard this great interview, I think it might have been on The World today, a reporter marveling at how wonderful it was to talk to an Iraqi without a minder, and how they actually spoke and they responded to questions, and they weren't afraid of Big Brother reporting, their every move. So I do think as it slows down and as reporters can get back in, we've had just about every person who works for us banned from Baghdad. So now that, once, it's safe and they're allowed back, they're all allowed in, you're going to see all kinds of stuff coming out of there, because for the first time we'll be able to really make a human connection with these people.
Before we go to our next question, because time is quickly catching up with us, if any of you did write questions down because you're microphone shy, can I ask Maya or Reg or someone to go around? If you raise your hand, someone will come and get your written question, because they don't want to discriminate against the shy. So if you have questions on cards that you want me to take a look at, go ahead and turn them in now, because time is of the essence. Yes, sir.
Michael Westgate. The war that we've been seeing seems to be very different from the war that the rest of the world's been seeing. And Fran mentions the technological possibilities that you get your feeds from wherever you choose. It seems to me there's a great opportunity that's been substantially missed, at least for most of us. I've learned a certain amount tonight about other websites and so forth that we could find other people's points of view. But I really feel that the media has an obligation to inform us what the rest of the world is seeing, whether that's true or false, or whether you agree or disagree with what's being said, whether it's by the French or the Russians or the Germans or the English or whoever. But I'd like some response from you as to what technologically is possible and what obligation you think the U.S. media has to inform us as to what the rest of the world is seeing. Thank you.
What I'd like to do, because we are running out of time, I'd like to take two questions at a time, since we have three sets of twos. You can, but let me just go ahead and get a second question on the table, and then people can answer any of them. But I just want everyone to get a chance to get their question. Sir?
My name is Burton Horn from Lexington, Mass. What I'm concerned about is the tendency, especially the television news media, to create a voyeuristic event. I'm concerned that the American public would look at is viewing this as one big football game, and people in the younger generation is becoming desensitized to war. Is this a Roman circus we're watching? The other concern I have is most of the reporters, especially in the television news, everything is so damn cute. Everybody is so preppy. Everything is just so. And I'm wondering, this is serious stuff. It's a damn war. But it comes across as being a little too cute. And I just want to comment on it.
Okay. As I heard them, and I might have gotten this wrong, I heard the two questions being, in part, why is our coverage, why is the rest of the world's coverage seemingly so different? Why, everyone's supposedly, presumably trying to report the objective facts. So if U.S. coverage is one way, what accounts for the differences in the other places?
Well, that's not the question I heard.
Okay,
why aren't we telling people what the other guys are reporting?
And that was the second piece of it, too.
And we are. And I'll give you a chapter and verse. I record every single network newscast when I don't see them, and I've got people who log them or pull them off the networks. We record. We're fanatics over at GBH, especially for our show Beat the Press on Friday. So we watch. You should see it. Somebody was sitting there with 400 tapes logging every single bit of coverage over the last week. We see it all. And I couldn't tell you. There must have been 15 of those kinds of stories on every, including the network newscast, the inside politics. Everybody does that. It's all a matter of where your clicker is. And as for the cute stuff, you know what? How cute is Ted Koppel? See that cute? He is awesome. And he has been he is the star. You know, by the way, you don't see a lot of the embedded reporters anymore. When was the last time you saw Bob Woodruff? They're off the air. Unfortunately, David Bloom is dead. You know, these guys, and it's the young and the healthy, and he died because of the way he was sitting in that tank, by the way. And if I were 63 years old and Ted Koppel, I wouldn't want to be there. Maybe my age, but no, I wouldn't want to be. And I think, you know, I think that's a cynical view.
And let's hear some. I want to hear some more comments, but just not on cute. I mean, there's the broader question of, are we slipping into voyeurism, where it's something that happens like any other TV show? That seems like a legitimate question. And this issue of if U.S. coverage is so different from other countries' coverage, is it because all the other countries are slanted and we've got it right, or what really explains those real differences? Anyone want to jump on any of this?
I mean, I feel like one of the lessons of this war and the coverage of this war is that perspective is everything. I mean, where you're coming from and what country you're from and what you've been brought up to believe. And, I mean, it all comes through in the different media from different parts of the world. And I feel like that's part of what we're taking in. And I agree with Emily that the stories are out there about what other people are saying on the air. My program is a co-production of the BBC, and we have this incredible resource, the BBC monitoring service at Caversham, which literally monitors media all over the world to find out what they're saying on, every minute of every day. And every few days we try to give readers listeners a sample of what that is. And I do think it helps people understand. If you can't put yourself in someone else's shoes, or at least hear it the way they're hearing it, you're never going to understand why the world feels like this, I guess. I mean, I think it's important.
If there's one thing I think we have learned in this, in the coverage of this war, it is the way different countries report what's going on, whether it be Deutsche Welle in Germany or in France, or the BBC or CNN, or, as Emily said, last year, who knew what Al Jazeera was? We all have now found out what they are. We all now know how other countries do indeed report what's going on. There is a slant to it because of where they're coming from. But it's a slant that I think we need to hear about, because we are in a free society, and these are things that we want to know what other countries are thinking about us. How do you convey that to the public in a general way, through a radio station or on a television station? I don't know. If I could figure that out, I probably wouldn't be here right now. But it's a good question, and one that hopefully will come to fruition in the next couple of years. We do live in an information age, and you can get anything you want, almost any time you want, any day you want.
Fran? Fran and then Wayne. Fran?
Oh, okay. Sorry. I do think we're doing our very best to give you what other networks or what other countries are showing, but you can also find out on your own on the internet. There are other ways, but in response to, is this a Roman circus? I don't know why anyone thinks commercial television is a public service. It's not. It's there to make money. So, there are cute reporters. And but the greatest thing about this war is that the Scud Stud, at least at my network, is a 52-year-old balding, graying guy named Walt Rogers. I mean, he's been amazing in this war. He's been, out there in the forefront, and he's done a hell of a lot better job than all the young guys. So, there you go.
Wayne?
I did think the questioner raised one really good point, though.
Microphone? Could you is your microphone?
Oh, sorry. I think the questioner did raise one extraordinarily good point, which is the impact that all this daily coverage, minute by minute, hour by hour, of bloody things happening, what the impact is going to be on young children. And how do you keep young children from watching TV? You don't. And so, if any of you out there in the social sciences, that might be something to really look at, or just if you're parents, and for us to look at. It's a question to which I don't have an answer, but it's that's a challenge and a question that I'm glad was raised.
I'm going to close off additional questions at this point because we have more people who want to ask than the time that we're going to be able to get through. So you six, hold your place, and we'll finish out with you guys. So next.
My name is Julie, and I probably hold an unpopular opinion, definitely different from that of Mr. Fritz. I think that information is education, and that's why I read the news. I would never know about so many places in the world if I didn't go look them up and learn about them on the news. The reason I didn't stand up when you asked about the coverage on Iraq is because, I think it's great. It's incredible. I don't own a TV, but every time I see a TV, it's on. Everything I go to has coverage on the war in Iraq. And that's why I didn't stand up, because I'm wondering what's going on in the rest of the world, and why isn't that being covered, and why do I have to go to the Santa Fe New Mexican online and foreign newspapers in order to find out what's going on inside this country? And I think how's that going to be dealt with a month from now? Is news just going to say, and recapping the last month in the world, this is happening? Or are they just going to keep going? And what are the politics behind whether or not we decide, are there government politics behind that or agency politics, I guess?
Okay. We're in this two at a time process. Yes, ma'am?
Hi, I'm Janice Richards, and my question is about when the journalists went through their training to be embedded, maybe somebody could speak to some of the guidelines, because that might provide us with a foundation to understand why it is they're doing some of the things they're doing. And that, too, seems contrary to your comment, Mr. Macklin, about that that the media has an adversarial relationship with the government, and how does that all kind of work itself out?
I think that gets back to the point that I briefly touched on in my opening remarks about how this war provided some new developments and some unexpected developments along the way. The fact that we were allowed to have cameras right up there on the front lines, in and of itself was a great advance in terms of being able to bring viewers to those scenes and let people see those things as they happen. I mean, it's an amazing technological accomplishment what they were able to do. However, again, because of the fact that these reporters were embedded, you get embedded by playing by the military's rules. I mean, the military's waging the war. You want to be out there with them, you play by their rules. The military is not a democracy. They didn't hold meetings and say, let's come up and democratically come up with the rules for how we're going to embed these reporters. They may have taken a little bit of input, but the bottom line is the Pentagon set the ground rules for the embedding process, and if you play along and you're willing to accept those rules and limitations, you go along. If you don't, then you don't go along. And competitively, none of the networks could afford to say, well, no, if we can't do it all our way, we're not going along, so they all went along. And I think one of the shortcomings of the reporters being embedded was the fact that while they were out there capturing all of these images, it was very difficult for them out there to tell the context in terms of how does what they are witnessing fit into the overall process. And as they might go mile by mile in these tanks and Humvees and encounter some resistance, encounter no resistance, encounter strong resistance, there was always a certain amount of, I would think, mystery as to exactly where does what's happening in front of their eyes fit into the overall perspective. And by the same token, they're right there with these soldiers, and as they start seeing incoming fire, I'm sure that was a pretty startling awakening for them too. This really is war. This isn't a television war, this is a real war. Those are real bullets, real cannons, real grenades, real bombs. And when you're out there laying in a ditch next to these soldiers, it's easy to see how there's a certain camaraderie developed simply because of the nature of what they're doing and the human instincts.
Let me interrupt there.
And that I think certainly swayed some coverage in terms of, you're not going to go out there with the troops and have every report that you're putting out over the year be one that's hypercritical of what you're seeing and what the men and women out there were doing. And I think that was a limitation, and I think it's a lesson we learned. I think we learned a lot of lessons about what embedding reporters does, and it's something that has advantages which we've benefited from, and it's had drawbacks that we've been strapped with and had to live with.
Quickly, because we are really running out of time, so quickly to Wayne and David, just some quick hits on this.
Just a quick one then. I'm a very mixed mind on embedding. I think for some of the reasons Mike just talked about, that it has worked well since the war has started, because you do, by having people right there with the troops, you get a sense of the smells, the sights, the sounds of war. I remember an AP story that had a young Marine quoted as saying, after seeing the body of one of his buddies, first time he'd seen one of his own buddies dead, he says, "Gee, we can die too." So it's worked well since it's started, but I think there was a certain insidiousness, and I don't know that the Pentagon planned this, but certain insidiousness towards leading us into war by starting the embedding system, in that people had to, it started months ago, the Pentagon invited people to join the system or to apply to get embedded with units. And I think so many newspapers, so many TV, radio, et cetera, leaped to do this, that you began to have almost an investment in going to war. And I don't know that anybody ever slanted coverage to follow up and make that investment come true, but I think it was there in the back of a lot of minds. Had to be. So I think it's a certain insidiousness about it.
David?
Yeah, I just, this is going to sound sort of odd, but I agree with the Herald.
Now that's news.
Yeah.
Someone write that down.
On the question, I wanted to respect that by saying, what else is going on in the world other than SARS, because that we could get it, so we're interested. Zimbabwe, Cuba, tyrants tightening their hold on people, taking advantage cynically of the world's attention on Iraq. If I could see a show of hands, how many times have you guys heard the phrase, sort of a humanitarian disaster of immense proportions? And you're thinking, yeah, it's been around.
You should stand up then.
Yeah, no. But really, unprecedented proportions would be to describe that what they're facing right there in Ethiopia this spring, with 14 million people on a famine that will be of a greater scale than what we've seen before from that country if the drought continues. And we were able to get one story in the paper from there, maybe page 14 or 16, but at least it was in on a Sunday. Even when we try, it's just very difficult to get that out on page 1.
Next 2 questions.
Thanks, David. I appreciated that answer. My name is Catherine Riley, and I have a question for all of you as representatives of the media, the electronic media and the print media in the free world. So the question is, what advice would you offer your Iraqi counterparts as they emerge over the next few months and years about being a journalist in a democracy? What tips would you have as the media begins to, and the press begins to define itself indigenously and authentically, assuming that we will indeed have a representative democracy in Iraq?
And the other question?
Well, that's a stepping
Sort of
forward on a
standalone
stepping
question.
back question. Using this war in Iraq as a learning template, what have you learned based on ratings and figures you have readily available to you about each of your mediums versus the other, as far as what is effective and what is being watched or listened to or read?
And I'm going to have to say we can't go through all 7 on these questions. So people who feel strongly about a question should jump in.
I'd like to, if I could give an advice to a journalist, whether it be radio, print, television in Iraq, who finally finds himself faced with democracy, I would just tell them to report what they see. Report what it is that they see, whether they see famine, whether they see tyranny, whether they see democracy, whether they see enjoyment, whether they see starvation, whether they see corruption. Whatever they see, that's what they should report on. That's what they should tell the people. The object, I mean, you want to let people know what they need to know. And what do they need to know? Well, frankly, you need to know everything. And you shouldn't have to leave anything out. And you shouldn't let the government tell you what you're going to put on the radio, in the newspaper, or on television, or on the internet now.
Okay. Other lessons for Iraqi media or comments on what have you learned about, what have the ratings told you about the other media?
I would tell my counterpart, be honest, be fair, and do a lot of listening and looking.
Anything else? Okay, let me grab the final two questions. Then I'm going to thank the panel and call on Brandy to close us out, I think.
Hi, my name is Margot Downey. I'm from Dorchester, and I'm a fan of all your shows, and I'm a great fan of the city section in the Globe. My concern is that while we have been talking about the war coverage, I was wondering why there was so little coverage of the peace movement or the anti-war. And do you think that the aggressive attitude of Washington has had any effect on, suggesting that people who were protesting or who were part of the peace movement were in fact traitors? Because the number of people who stood up in the room who said they were for the war was rather small, and even the number who changed their mind was small. But I felt that there was not, the coverage that I saw, even in Boston, was on concern about violence, a lot of emphasis on concern of violence in the demonstrations and in the marches, and what was going to happen, as opposed to that as a valid position.
Thank you. And the next question?
Yeah, hi, my name is Robert McDougall. I teach down the street, professor of communication at Emerson College. I was just wondering, there's a lot of talk here about how we can all access all kinds of information and things, and certainly in this room we're a really bad sample. We're all sort of an elite, an informational elite, right? Sort of a confusion, it seems, is going on here between theory and practice, and Mr. Fritz was talking about the educational system potentially being at fault here. And again, in theory, I guess you're right, but in practice, with the lack of funding and things, we're not going to get this stuff in our schools, in our public schools. It's sort of left to the new media, the electronic media, the internet in particular. And we came in a little bit late, but I was wondering if anybody had addressed this. What can the internet do? I don't know what the yellow means. Maybe I missed.
You've got like 20 seconds.
20 seconds. Okay. We seem to be moving more toward imagery on the net as well. Although in theory, there's a sort of a bottomless news hole online. We tend to be seeing sort of above the fold, lots of images, lots of interactive links, which ends up being sort of a start button to look at a series of photographs or something like that. Is this just a phase? Are we going to get back to some deeper coverage online? And then also the average citizen, again, what are they tapping into? Do they know about Al Jazeera? Do they know about these alternative links? They tend to go through the major search engines and find the mainstream stuff, right?
Thank you.
Let me just follow up a little bit on the education aspect here. I don't think it's the media's job to educate the public. It is the media's job to inform the public. If that happens to be education, as one of the ladies here said, she learned something because we informed her, that's terrific. I don't think that it is the obligation of the media to let your children know what's going on as far as where different countries are, who runs them. Again, I'm sounding convoluted here, and I'm going to contradict myself. I guess what I'm trying to say here is there's only so much that you can do in the time that you have. You let people know that Iraq is in the Middle East. You let people know that Iraq is between Iran, Syria, its borders, Saudi Arabia, and then you move on. When you're at home with your children, when they're on the internet, are you letting them play games, or are you letting them go online to try to find out what they need to know regarding being educated, regarding geography, regarding spelling, regarding history, any other subject that you want to think about? But I don't think it's the media's job to educate your children. It is our job, though, to inform you. And if that's the same thing, good.
Can I address the anti-war?
Sure.
Just quickly. I think you make a good point that early on, when the war was, first I heard about it was July 4th weekend, so that was almost a year ago. And since that time, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the New York Times have all been taken to task and tried to make up for lost time. And they've done some good in recent months. But the anti-war movement coverage is over. It's over for that. We're at war. But I have to ask you, did you go to any of those? You did. Because I was stunned by the shallowness, if I may, of the movement itself. 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't want to go to war. What's wrong with you people? This is over for that. That was a 1968 kind of slogan. You know I was looking for thoughtful people. The person I kept coming up with was James Carroll, from the columnist from the Boston Globe. There is no one in the United States who makes a more articulate and impassioned argument against war. I didn't hear that in droves. I didn't hear it in collective thought. I didn't hear it in groups like this. So we were asked to go to these, frankly, pathetic anti-war rah-rah. And what else? What's Mike Macklin going to do when he gets there? He hears the slogan, 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't want to go to war. He goes, around the guy was talking to the thing like this. And then you come away, you got your minute, 20 seconds. It was not thoughtful dialogue, and that's why it didn't get the coverage.
Fran?
We also heard the criticism and responded, and we have a reporter who's assigned to anti-war coverage every single day, Maria Hinojosa. I'm part of the anti-war desk. I get the mails. I get 2 emails every day, one with the list of all the pro-war protests in the next few days, and the second one that's all the anti-war protests. And we have 600 affiliates out of the 750 stations across the country, and we try to bring in as much coverage of those protests as possible. So it's available to producers to get on the air, but sometimes there's just so much else going on that it doesn't get on the air. But we are bringing it in, and we are trying to do a good job about it.
And unfortunately, that does not do justice to the questions. And I have another question. I finally got a written question, but it's too late, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. But next time, if you get it to me earlier, or you can ask them afterwards. But I do have to cut it off, if for no other reason than Ron has to wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and I promised that I wouldn't disturb his sleep cycle. So I hope you'll join, Brandy will close us out, but I hope you'll join me in thanking these reporters, journalists of all kinds, all media here. In some ways, I feel like today was the day for me to call a press conference, but I have nothing to announce. They're all gathered here. But thank you very much for being here.